If you want to know how to properly reverse park a car, any car, into a parking space, just watch this video. Forget about all the other rubbish you've watched on this subject and tune in to this video from start to finish. We'll show you how to reverse park, explain the theory and geometry behind the three-line method, and show you with several clear examples that it doesn't matter whether you're driving a micro car, a sensible mid-sized car, or even an oversized yank tank assault vehicle. If you know the process and understand the simple concepts involved, you can reverse park just about anything on four wheels. So the good old three-line method is based on the premise that parking bays are a standard width. Here in Australia, the standard width is 2.4 metres. If you're parking in a 2.4 metre or 8 foot wide parking space, this method works. If the bays are wider, then obviously some adjustment is required, but 2.4 metres gives you a three-line method baseline. So you approach your chosen bay using a straight path about 2 metres away from the parked cars. You approach with your indicator on. On the way, you count line 0, line 1, line 2, and line 3. You stop when line 3 appears in a predefined position on your passenger window, shown here by the orange line. So this is where geometry comes into it. So please don't switch off at this point. Some of that stuff you learned in maths at high school that you thought you would never ever use is actually used in real life, as in when parking a car. The inner rear wheel of your car is going to turn a total of 90 degrees, a right angle, as you manoeuvre your car into the bay. In doing that 90-degree turn, the rear wheel will turn in a tight arc on a predefined radius, in this example approximately 3.1 metres. The exact turning radius of your car's inner rear wheel will depend on several factors. 1. The turning circle of your car. 2. The wheelbase. And 3. The track. Now don't worry too much about the terminology, but understand that the tightest possible arc of your inner rear wheel is largely predefined by the 3 fixed measurements that I just mentioned, combined with the ability of the driver to steer quickly while manoeuvring at very low speed. Now that 3.1 metre radius is made up of the components shown in the yellow box, and is the distance that the car will travel relative to the white lines in getting from point A to point B. So the method works for all sorts of vehicles, from sensible sized cars such as a Corolla or a Hyundai i30, micro cars such as a Kia Picanto, and urban assault school pickup vehicles such as the Ram 1500 or the Ford Ranger. So here are some typical examples that demonstrate that the three-line method is not a one-size-fits-all approach. So what we're showing here in these images are some pretty typical sort of cars that you might find being parked in suburban car parks. The image of the car at the top of the screen is an AI generated image with realistic dimensions, but with the roof removed so that you can see where the driver's sitting and what their view is towards the third line. And it's the driver's view of the third line that is going to vary a lot depending on the length and the size of the car that you're driving. So what we're trying to show here is the driver's view of the third line and the positioning of the rear wheel so that you can get the car efficiently into the bay. So here's an example of a Hyundai i30. So when this car is positioned correctly to begin the reversing manoeuvre, the driver's view of the third line would be somewhere around the middle of the passenger window. Now this will vary to some extent depending on the height of the driver. A very short driver might have the seat set way forward, and a tall driver could have the seat way back. So although the average view would be somewhere around the middle of the passenger window, a short driver might see it up further towards the front of the window, and a taller driver may be just backwards of halfway along the window. There is some slight variation, of course, but we're talking about typical examples for an average size driver. Now the next example is a Toyota Corolla. It's a very similar scenario to the Hyundai i30 because these cars are very similar dimensions. So therefore the driver's view of that third line is going to be very similar to the example with the Hyundai i30. The next example is the BYD Atto 3. And as you can see from the angle of that orange line, it's very similar again to the Hyundai i30 and the Corolla. Now this next example, this yellow Kia Picanto, is what we'd call a microcar. And as you can see, the driver's view of that third line is vastly different to the previous examples. In this case, the driver is looking a lot further forward and probably seeing that third line up around the external rear view mirror. You'll also note that the rear wheel, rather than being beyond the second line, it actually is the other side of the second line, closer to where the white car is parked. So it's vastly different in terms of where the car is going to commence its manoeuvre from, because it is turning on a much smaller turning radius. Indeed, some driving instructors teach their students to line up the third line on the external rear view mirror. And as you can see from this diagram, that is a flawed process because that method will work for a very small vehicle, but not for anything that's much larger. So you do need to be mindful of the dimensions of your car and line up accordingly. Now we're getting into some slightly larger cars. This one, the white RAV4, is a little bit bigger than the previous ones we've looked at. And as you can see, the driver's view of the third line is starting to change a little bit. It's just a little bit beyond the middle of the passenger window, getting down towards the rear half of the window. Rear wheel's still in a similar position because the turning arc for these cars is still very similar to all the other mid-size cars we talked about. And here we have a red Toyota Camry, very, very similar to the RAV4 in terms of what the driver sees when they look at the third line, when they're lined up correctly, and in terms of how tightly the car can turn into the bay. This next example, the yellow Holden Commodore, is virtually identical to the Toyota Camry. It's about the same length, the driver sees the line in about the same position, and its turning radius is basically identical. Now we're getting into some larger vehicles still. This one is the Toyota Prado four-wheel drive. It's a little bit bigger than the Camry and the RAV4, and as you can see, the driver's view of that third line is basically straight across the door pillar. And the rear wheels are a bit further down the road, so that turning arc is going to be a little bit longer. Now we're getting into the realm of vehicles that don't really belong in suburban car parks. But because they're fairly common, we have to cover these in the examples. As you can see from this one, it's a blue Ford Ranger. It's quite a large vehicle, and the driver's view of that third line is different to all the other examples in that the driver is looking backwards towards the third line, behind that door pillar. You can also see that the rear wheel is a long, long way down the road, basically halfway between line 2 and line 3. So it's a much bigger arc for that vehicle to turn. So the final example we're covering here is the Ram 1500 Ute. This is a car that's popular in the US, unfortunately becoming popular in Australia, but they are the scourge of our car parks. They're too big for the bays, they make it impossible for anybody to see when they come in and park next to you, and they just aren't designed for a 2.4 metre bay. But as we can see from the diagram, it is still possible to park one, but you will be well past the third line looking back behind the door pillar to try and line up on the third line, and the rear wheel is going to be basically at least halfway between line 2 and line 3. You've also got to start a long way further out to get that arc to fit around the white car. And the final image here is just a composite shot showing a comparison between the Ram 1500 and the Kia Picanto, and allows you to make a decision as to which car you would prefer to be parking. So thanks for watching and for staying with me for the full 10 minutes of the video. If you like what you saw, please leave a comment and a like.